And I also volunteer with TSU and ACTRA.
Mike Manrod, lead the security team for Grand Canyon Education, and then also teach for GCU, and also volunteer with TSU and ACTRA. So what we really hope you walk away with here, we're going to look at just some new insights we had. It all started, the story started with a campaign in the wild, an ACTRA submission, and Ezra doing some reversing of those samples, and he did some really impressive work, and he pinged me on either Discord or Zoom or something. It was like, dude, have you heard of this AutoIT thing? I'm like, no, I haven't. It kind of sounds like maybe I've heard it mentioned years ago, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. And the more we looked at it, the more we came to realize that the capability set that AutoIT renders are like concerning, alarming, and from a red team perspective offers quite a bit of potential. So we really looked at how to explore these capabilities, again, building on the foundation of some awesome reversing Ezra did. One of the insights was obviously that it was DarkGate malware. And from that, we began to expand into the topic of, what could we expect to be next with this? Like, where will that development go?
So just a bit about the history of it. So as he was saying, this kind of started with an actual campaign that we were submitted a sample to analyze. The original sample came from a compromised website. It was really evasive at the time. This was back in September 2023, so that was before there was really too much like broadcasted information and analysis on it. There were a few places that picked it up, but a bunch of the major companies you'd expect hadn't really seen it yet. Like you were saying, after the initial analysis, we figured out it was DarkGate eventually. And typically, within ACTRA TSU, when we analyze something, it's kind of just writing a report, letting everyone know about it. This sort of developed into like, hey, where's this going? Like, what's going to start happening next? So that's the majority of what this is how AutoIT plays into what we think is coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. So DarkGate arrived on the scene in 2017, and we'll look at a timeline here in a bit. But the adversary that we now know as Rastafari was behind AutoIT, or behind leveraging AutoIT to deliver DarkGate and DarkGate in general. But we really started to see this emerge as a trend, as Ezra mentioned, within the past year. So it's really been like 2023 that there's been a lot of promotion and buzz around the malware as a service offering of DarkGate. And again, the AutoIT piece really stood out as something that really got us thinking.
And one thing, I'm sure you've heard this mentioned at a lot of talks, we stand on the shoulders of giants. We weren't the first on the scene when it comes to DarkGate specifically. The very first analysis I found that was actually reverse engineering the entire chain was by OX or Oxtoxin, not sure which one he goes by. So huge shout out to him. His initial analysis is what allowed us to perform what we did. He was one of the first people that really tore it apart. Same with Deutsche Telekom. They're a company that was also doing an analysis way back in September or January or July of last year. And these two people specifically provided a lot more resources for analysis and investigation. Obviously, as a side note, there's a ton of other companies that we've been able to use what they've provided to figure all this out, but just wanted to give a shout out to those two specifically. AutoIT, so maybe you have heard of it, maybe you haven't, probably not. It's supposed to be an automation and scripting platform for Windows specifically, it's Windows only. And it's used for that in some companies, but what it's really good at is delivering malware. So shellcode and malware droppers that are extremely evasive, one, because of how little known as how small like AutoIT is as a company. It's also closed source. And they don't like it when you reverse engineer their stuff. It's stated specifically on their website. If you ask how to reverse engineer it on their forums, they'll ban you. So while at first when we were discovering all this, we kind of thought it was new, kind of novel, and we'll get into the timeline later. This actually goes back to 2008. It has been around since then, and it has barely changed since then.
Yeah, so it was really funny, again, we thought it was novel, but when we started looking, AutoIT actually came out in '99, and then AutoIT version 2 the robust version that basically we know today was a year after release, around 2000. 2007 was actually the first mention of the malicious use of AutoIT on a forum. That's the furthest back we could find. McAfee wrote a great blog post in 2012 that I think nobody read, and the funniest part is McAfee didn't attribute the actual researcher. It just says McAfee, so couldn't even figure out who to reach out to on that, but it was really a good warning very, very early on compared to the rest. 2016, it wasn't talked about much, but Locky, Loadorat, and several other malware variants were using AutoIT as a loader as far back as like 2016, 2017. 2018, DarkGate arrived on the scene, but we didn't know it at the time, right? There's no reference to it as DarkGate, but clearly it was there. And then lastly, 2023, attribution to Rastafari offered as malware as a service, and then that arrow pointing to the future of lots of cycles of innovation, and we think there's going to be a lot more product development on this. Oh yeah, there we go. So AutoIT, the product seems pretty sketch, but it has legit uses. And in fact, shout out to Christian Talon and several others who contributed to our research along the way too. Christian actually pointed out that some malware sandboxing products use AutoIT for the orchestration within the products. So it's even used within security tools. Of course, we panicked as we were analyzing this, blocked it everywhere, did the usual stuff, and then realized, heck, there's more legit use that people don't talk about, but it's out there. So basically, one thing that's really significant about the fact that this is a legit product, as sketch and dodgy as it might seem, is it has a valid certificate. So antivirus vendors are going to tend to trust it or trust what's run by it because it has that valid certificate, making it more evasive.
So getting into the analysis of it, back in the very beginning, this, as we were saying, this is the first mention of this use case I could find. This is on the official AutoIT forums. For all of the screenshots I'm showing in this, all of the users are going to be blanked out just because I don't want to show any of that information. So this was posted August 2007. This is a user explaining like, hey, I found a way to execute memory that's not supposed to be executable using things that are completely unrelated to what they're doing. So this is just to show like in 2007, this user figured out the very beginning, and this is still how DarkGate does it. Like it's the same method. It has not changed beyond like a couple different variables in it. And I'll get deeper into how this actually works later. This is just for a little historical context. So fast forward all the way to June of last year, and we'll go over everything in between. But fast forwarding all the way up to June last year, this is when Rastafari first started posting the sale of this malware as a service on a forum called XSS, which is a Russian forum. So this is the first post he made advertising it. Gist of this is like, hey, I've been working on this project since early 2017. I've developed thousands of hours into it. It's super cool, and I'll let you use it for 10K a month. Or maybe it was 15K, something like that. This is some of the features that it advertises. I'm not going to go through all of these. This isn't really the focus, but just to give you an idea, it's pretty much anything you could ever want as a malware operator. Once it's on the host, and if it gets on it undetected, you can do pretty much whatever you want with it. The big point that we're trying to get across when it comes to DarkGate as a whole is the rapid evolution and the future that's coming with it. So this is just like a really small look at how it's changed just since last June. So the initial lures, it depended on the specific payload and who's using it. The one that I saw was just malvertising. Since then, they've done search engine poisoning, and then up recently, as this January, they've started using Microsoft Teams. So it's basic social engineering. They'll send you a link in Microsoft Teams. You'll click it. It'll download the dropper, go through the rest, and we'll go through the chain. The dropper itself has also changed a lot. Originally, it was just a VBS file or an MSI. Then they switched to zip files that had LNK files in them, and right now they're using MSI side loading, and we'll go through that as well. The loader is the interesting part. So that's been AutoIT the whole time since the inception. So originally, it has changed a little bit. Originally, AutoIT was used to just drop a PE file and execute it. Then they switched to using a shellcode approach, and that's what they're currently using now. And what we'll be talking about a lot is what we think they're going to start doing next. And the payload itself, again, I'm not going to go through all the things it does. The only thing that's really changed about it is its EDR bypasses and then new utilities that people have requested. So this is what the initial infection chain looks like. So this is for the campaign that I analyzed way back last September. It was pretty simple compared to what's going on now, but essentially it starts with whatever malicious site, so it could be an impersonation or any of the ones I was talking about. That'll download a VBS file. That VBS file will then copy curl, so it'll copy the actual binary, rename it, and then use curl to download the AutoIT interpreter and both an AutoIT script. Once both those are downloaded, the VBS file will then execute the AutoIT interpreter with that script as a parameter. Once the script is executed, that will inject shellcode, which then decodes and executes the DarkGate payload. So keep that image in your head for just a moment. The current chain looks like this. So this is what it looked like up until 2 weeks ago. This specific sample and research was done by Splunk. So if you want to see where this chain comes from, just Google Splunk DarkGate. It'll be the first thing that pops up, unless it's been poisoned. So I'll go over how this works, and then I'll go over the considerations. So way more complicated than previously. All starts off with a PDF file that downloads a cab archive. That archive, when opened, downloads an MSI. And then from there, everything else is within that MSI. So the MSI has a cab that unpacks and executes the legitimate binary for WinDebug. So it's the legitimate binary, same hash and everything, and then use a side loading technique to load a malicious DLL that WinDebug would normally be loading. That DLL, when loaded, will access some data that is also within the MSI file. It's just data.bin. Once that has been done, it'll decode the data in there, which drops an executable. That will be executed. Grab some other data from another file in there, data2.bin. Then that will be decoded, which drops the AutoIT interpreter, the AutoIT script, and then the rest is the same. So what you might notice here is pretty much everything has changed besides this part of it. So instead of grabbing the AutoIT interpreter and the AutoIT script using curl, they're just using more advanced methods to make sure they can decode this, get it on the system, but the rest is the same. So breaking down how that part actually works, the AutoIT interpreter executes the compiled script. So those AutoIT scripts are .au3 when they're not compiled. When you compile them, they turn into A3X. For some reason, DarkGate renames them to .au3 even though they are compiled, which is confusing, but that's just how they do it. A function within AutoIT named DLL call is used to execute machine code. And then the executed machine code will read and decode a hidden payload that is prepended to the compiled script. So the actual DarkGate payload is within that .au3 script. And then obviously when the payload is decoded, it is executed. That results in the final actual DarkGate payload. And so all of this is occurring within the AutoIT.exe memory space, which again is a signed executable, which is awesome. So here's some examples. Those might be hard to read. I have a zoomed in one too. But these are what the actual AutoIT scripts looked like decompiled. So the first one is a real sample from DarkGate's campaign. You can see everything's obfuscated. You can't read any of it. It's terrible. And then the bottom one is what it looks like deobfuscated. So that's this. That string up at the top there, that is the actual shellcode. What it's essentially doing is taking that shellcode, finding the length, creating a memory area of the same length as the shellcode, putting it in there, making it executable, and then calling it with that bottom line DLL call user32. That's where it's actually calling that memory space within the AutoIT executable. And that executes the shellcode. So this is what the actual payload and payload decoding looks like. So all of that readable text on the top is the actual DarkGate payload. Everything below it is the compiled AutoIT script. So this is what I was saying. It prepends the compiled script with the actual payload. The first 8 characters are a decoder key. So it's just encrypted using an XOR operation. So it takes the hex from the key, takes the hex from the actual payload, compares them. If they match, it's a 0. If they don't, it's a 1. And it does that for the entire payload. And then the other thing I have highlighted, that is the entry point for AutoIT scripts. So it's AU3 exclamation mark EA06M. That's useful because that will be there for any AutoIT compiled file, and you can use that to find them, essentially.
So a few questions began to emerge based upon this analysis. So we can see that Rastafari is constantly evolving the TTPs, but as Ezra pointed out, the one thing that hasn't changed in the delivery of AutoIT at all is or the delivery of DarkGate at all is the AutoIT delivery mechanism. So that kind of got us scratching our head like, hey, what would the next evolution be? So the first thing that's kind of like wickedly interesting if we look at how long AutoIT's been used as a loader in general is the fact that it still works, right? And for DarkGate specifically, as they've changed every piece of their delivery chain except for the AutoIT component, again, that's a pretty profound statement because it means that's the one piece that's still working, the part they haven't needed to change. But there have been a lot of great blog posts about this recently since this analysis started last year. And eventually it'll stop working. So we started thinking, like, how do we skate to where the puck is going? It's clear that Rastafari developed a range of features and is releasing them in increments and batches. So what's next? What happens when it no longer works? What will change? What can we expect? And that led to the question of, does it need to be an AU3 A3X file type? Like, could there be another file extension or file type, and would this still work? And what would that look like?
So I'm sure a lot of you are thinking of the answer of that. So next, instead of telling you, I'm just going to do a live demo. This is going to be on a mouse pad, so I apologize. And yeah, no, I got it. We got it. So I'll show you what we found out, and then I'll explain what's going on. So I'm just going to show you. I have a notepad file here, .text, just says hello CactusCon. Can you guys read that from there? Yeah, it's close enough. We'll zoom in a little. And then over here, I have a very funny GIF. I think it's hilarious. So you can see this still works perfectly, like you can open up in Windows to any user, completely unsuspecting. I'm going to go back over here. What I'm opening up is the AutoIT interpreter. So this is that file I was talking about that's downloaded or decoded to execute, typically encoded AU3 files. I'm going to change to everything. Click on that GIF. Click open. And it opens PowerShell. So what's going on here is we've just done the same thing that they were doing, but kind of in reverse. We've taken that compiled AU3 file, added it to the end of a GIF file, and it just works. So what's going on right here, this is just a little script we wrote to demonstrate. Obviously, if this was a threat actor doing this, you wouldn't see any of this. But this is just base 64 encoded string that we're going to decode and then run. And if you can see that, it says encryption complete. What's up, CactusCon? I'm going to close this, go back to my notepad, and it's encrypted. So a few notes on this. I can also show you what the actual script looks like when it's decompiled. This is what it looks like, super simple. You'd think this would be really easy to detect, but we did this both with Windows Defender on and another different EDR. Neither one detected it, and that was just launching it as an executable. That wasn't even hiding it within the GIF file. So far, nothing we've tried has really seen that. So I'll go ahead and close this back out, go back here. So kind of a recap for that. The AutoIT interpreter does not care. You can have any data you want either at the beginning or at the end. As long as you don't mess with those entry point characters I talked about, it will not care. It will just execute. So again, those characters, AU3 exclamation mark, EA06, as long as those are present and they're at the beginning and end of the compiled script, it'll just run. This can be used to hide compiled scripts and, consequently, any encoded payloads within any file type or extension. We just did it with GIFs because it was easy to show, like, you can see the visual representation. And yeah, we haven't seen this anywhere in the wild using this method at all, not just DarkGate, but in general. I couldn't find anything online on the forums or anything about it. but they'll probably start using this. That's kind of what we're getting at, is like, they clearly have a release cycle for everything that they're doing. As soon as I'm sure their customers report like, hey, this got detected, I want my money back, they're like, here's a new version, we fixed that. And this is kind of one thing that we see coming up, because I'm sure a lot of you security-minded people are thinking, oh, I'm just gonna block AU3 and A3X in my environment. That's not gonna work. If that's the only thing you're doing, it's still going to go through. Same thing with the AutoIT interpreter. So since it's a signed executable, obviously there's a limited number of hashes related to it, but you can just change the hash of that executable. That's not going to stop it. So we're going to pause on the technical side. We'll get back to that. And then we're going to have a little lesson on OPSEC regarding this as well. So way back in 2009, so this isn't that first post I showed you, it's a different one. Different user as well. They found a different method, it's kind of related, kind of different, about running an exe from memory instead of doing shellcode. That's not really an important part. They were just talking about this on this post. So going forward, this is the same post, but in 2017, November 15th, 2017, keep that in mind. There's a user that we've blurred out all the stuff for, but they posted a binary, and that they were trying to inject into AutoIT. So same method DarkGate is using. And they're like, hey, this isn't working, can someone help? And this is just another screenshot of a different post they had that also was relating to using VBS scripts with AutoIT. Interesting. Think I've seen this somewhere before. Just as another note, this is a post from XSS where he was selling this malware just to show he's Russian national. Adding CIS detection, that means DarkGate can't run on any Russian computers, just a side note. And then also, he mentions that he's been developing this project since early 2017. Okay. Going forward, this was in that same post, someone was helping him trying to fix this binary he was running, and he posted this error message, and he was like, hey, it's still not working. And he included this in it. So, it's just interesting, you know? I couldn't find any other instances of anyone speaking Russian on this forum, but just a coincidence so far. I also found another post 3 days later on a Russian cyber hacking forum. So this is a different forum, but it's the same username and profile. So could be related, might not be. What he's asking here is how to embed command line parameters into an exe. Think I've seen that before. So that's just, you know, these are all events that could be correlated, might not be. Obviously can't make any sort of definite attribution with any of this. But if you remember, on the first post, he posted a binary. I decided to recompile it to see what he was posting. It was malware. And this was unrelated to DarkGate, so just a virus that came up in 2017, 2018. No attribution to it. It's just a random virus. But I also decided to analyze it myself within like Ghidra, do a static analysis. And I happened to find this, where they still had their user profile in it. And so that wasn't just like, you know, admin or anything. It was a discernible name that was similar to the profile within the AutoIT forums. So just a little lesson, if you're ever going to make malware, maybe don't post on the internet about it.
So I think one key takeaway, so one, you know, really, really cool, exciting stuff, you know, Ezra, and yeah, I mean, I think this makes a use case for the value we can get out of reversing in general, right? And making reversing more mainstream and something that we all do rather than something a few people do in a lab somewhere and we just consume their outputs, right? Like we can all be doing this. But the other thing we have to realize is stopping malware from running on our hosts is not something we can rely upon. I don't think we ever could, but this is an example of where, you know, should you have a good EDR, should you have a good next-gen antivirus, should you do all these things? Absolutely. Can you rely upon them? No, you really can't. Here we go. So what do we do about this? Well, of course, the first thing we actually did, like let's not talk about hypothetically, let's talk about what Ezra and I and our teams did. We ran home and, of course, blocked AU3 and AU3X. we all know from that demo how that turns out, right? It's a good Band-Aid. It's better than nothing, but it's not enough. Of course, if we use an application allow listing, disallow listing solution, something like app locker or airlock or similar solutions, some antiviruses have this built in, we could block AutoIT as an application. Sounds good, right? Well, unfortunately, AutoIT can be changed and it still runs, right? So we don't think you can really rely upon that. Also, the compiled executables are really problematic in that one of the fun experiments we did that was pretty evasive and probably shouldn't have been was to take that same encryptor payload that you saw demonstrated super simple and just compile it as an executable in AutoIT. And I pulled that up in IDA and started analyzing it. And then we also did some like hello world, examples that's just a PowerShell and a ping. It's basically undiscernible. You upload both payloads to VirusTotal. 10 or 11 engines pick up equally on both the benign and the malicious. So clearly there's some that have decided, well, AutoIT's bad, we should flag everything AutoIT, but they have no idea until it, maybe sandboxing, maybe dynamic analysis, depending on exactly what your payload does, but they really have no idea at face value an executable compiled with AutoIT that's benign versus malicious. Moreover, an AutoIT compiled executable has the entire Windows API, even if all you have it do is open CMD and ping. It has the entire, think about the implications of that for a moment. The imports in the file are the same if you created a rat in AutoIT as they are if you created a tool to just check network connectivity and log the results to a file, right? So it's, we also did the, thanks to those I experimented on in the malware analysis class, we had 50 folks, and I see some nods and laughs of recognition. We had 50 folks open this up and take about a half hour to analyze it and try to find if there were any discernible features on the portable executables. I'm like, Ezra and I only have so many hours in the day. We're only 2 people. Let's stick 50 smart people at it and see if anybody can tell the malicious from the benign using static analysis and their choice of IDA or Ghidra. Nobody found anything conclusive. None of us could. Right? It looks, now of course you can go through the many hours Ezra put into deobfuscating, reversing, decompiling this thing. But again, to do that reliably, you'd have to do that with the benign and the malicious, or you're stuck with dynamic analysis, right? So it's challenging in that the compiled executable is evasive and difficult. The AU3 script can be embedded in things, and the application can be changed. And granted, you'd get rid of the device certificate. Like if you took the AutoIT interpreter, created a weaponized version to evade people allow listing, the good news about that is at least it wouldn't have a valid certificate then. That part would break. So any Jurassic Park fans here, the original, yeah, life will find a way. This is one of my favorite quotes. Malware will find a way. We see here covert delivery mechanisms, obfuscated payloads, defense evasion, and DarkGate is at a price point where these are things that years ago we would associate with a really advanced actor, but this is something anybody can rent, anybody can buy. It could be leveraged by access brokers, it could be leveraged and other actors. We've seen AutoIT's been used in the past, and other actors besides DarkGate are likely to use AutoIT as well. Next-gen antivirus and EDR, it definitely helps. It certainly will help to analyze it after it does something bad. And what's in that script might be detected, but if what's in the script doesn't get detected, if that's new, sneaky, and evasive, it gets a little bit tricky, right? So we can count on new features, we can count on creativity, we can count on evolution, and that's not good for any of us as a defender. So obviously start with the basics, right? The usual stuff, EDR, MFA on all your environments, make sure it's difficult to bypass your MFA due to processes and other things. Email security, Sandbox attachments don't totally block file types you don't really need to allow through. But again, we have to count on that this is going to sneak by that. Like, that's not going to work holistically. Application allow listing, like true allow listing, would work, right? Like, if you do a baseline of your host, you determine every application that's allowed to run, and that's all that will run, that will work. Unfortunately, like, show of hands, how many in the room have done that in an absolute sense in an enterprise environment with, say, anywhere between 10,000 and 100,000 users? Okay, I feel much better because I have it like, I found this to be elusive. So that's like, for those on the stream, there weren't any hands that came up. Maybe somebody was shy and they'll catch me at happy hour, but no hands. So segmentation at all levels, right? Like your edge firewall, C2. Like if we go all the way back to Sunburst, and again, leaning on some great research by Christian Talon that we've all learned from and leveraged. But if you really looked at Sunburst and the SolarWinds, series of breaches that cascaded out of that supply chain attack, anybody who actually just didn't allow their servers to go to arbitrary locations on the internet, Sunburst wouldn't have worked at all, right? Like, and yet it got all of these security firms. It succeeded at getting all of these three-letter agencies and government entities. So we all know what to do, but doing it sometimes is difficult and evasive. But if you tighten up just your network edge controls, it's going to do a lot. Micro segmentation, using products to basically application ring fence, identify what traffic should be there, and then scope that appropriately. And shout out to Cameron and the audience for just a lot of cool groundbreaking research on how to take that kind of thing from pipe dream to reality. Like that, unlike application allow listing, that should be possible for all of us. There's products, it's doable. Network detection and response, or IDS, is huge here. If we have to assume that malware is going to run on our hosts, having a good SOC, having good logging, having good incident response, that's not something you throw over the wall at a vendor like, hey, we went out to bid to 15 vendors, we threw it to the cheapest, and that's our SOC. Like, if that's the case, stuff like this is absolutely going to be successful. But we have to prepare to fail a lot, but to respond to that failure in an effective manner. So SOC, IR, continuous analysis, adaptive controls, and the ability to detect lateral movement is key. Purple teaming is going to be really key. Like, if you're using, I'll give a shout out to like Sliver by Bishop Fox, things like, we know adversaries are using cracked versions of Cobalt Strike, Brute Ratel, and attack chain. So like, let's use these things as defenders, get used to testing with them, see what they look like. Even things like Atomic Red Team Invoke. Start testing what these scenarios look like in our environments and our systems, and get used to detecting and responding. Because again, that initial point of compromise is going to happen all the time for all of us. We're not going to absolutely stop it. And this is just one variant, one use case, one live off the land set of vectors. Effective identity access strategies, privileged access management, hardening our domains helps a lot. We know that if we're going to assume initial access is going to happen, we should deal with our entire identity and access strategy with that assumption in mind. And that's a whole other talk in itself, so I'm not going to go through all that now, but ping us after if you have questions on that. CTI, organizations like ACTRA, InfraGard, all of the ISACs and ISAOs, we've got to be sharing these things as they happen. Because I think Ryan Murray put it best in the panel yesterday, an attack on one is an attack on all, and if we're working together, we're going to have a better chance. So lots of control frameworks deal with this. Has anybody struggled with segmentation? Consider that a difficult topic over the years. So prioritize your efforts there. Obviously, if you can get to an absolute like application ring fencing, zero trust, locked down state, that's wonderful. But if you can't, if you look at Alfredo Pareto, the Italian economist, looked out over 100 years ago at the wealth of Italy and noticed that, wow, 80% of the people control 20% of the people control 80% of the wealth, and thus was born the 80-20 rule that we all know about. So similarly with ports and protocols and services, if we look at exploit chains, it's the same folks. It's like the Harry Potter GIF or meme. It's always you. Why is it always you three? Well, it's always often the same ports, protocols, and services that are exploited. So if you cannot do good segmentation on everything, which is a good idea, focus your segmentation on these commonly exploited ports and protocols, right? Deal with the usual suspects, if you will. Let's see. So obviously, SOC for the win. We already talked about this. Don't throw SOC over the wall. If you have to assume that initial compromise is going to happen to all of us, this should be the bread and butter. Being able to triage, figure out true positives, escalate them quickly, and shut down an adversary. I've heard reports of like Akira going from initial access, or at least the point they maybe bought access from an access broker, to ransom delivery in as little as 4 hours. I haven't personally validated that claim, but dwell time is shrinking. We all know that. So being able to respond and interrupt those cycles more quickly is going to make a big difference. And then testing those processes, digging in, purple teaming, these things are really going to save our bacon. So in the controls list, you might look at that and you're like, wait a minute, did I fall asleep for a second? Isn't that NIST 800-207, zero trust architecture, pretty much, which is really just a roll-up of all the things everybody has been saying we should do for the past 2 decades? The answer is yes, absolutely. It really is the fundamental things. If we do them correctly, they work.
Cool, and then so there's a lot with this that we just weren't able to do that we wanted to do, just kind of because we both have jobs and ran out of time before this event came up. So there's a lot of future research that I invite literally anyone. If you are interested in any part of this, DM me. I can give you something to do. If you're looking for work to do within this, I can send you something. No matter what your skill set is, hands-on keyboard works for research as well. So like one of the things is combining this extension change method with a working and stealthy shellcode. So what we showed you was just PowerShell, but that's not the same method DarkGate uses. They use direct machine code. If we could get both of those working together, obviously then we can create better detections for that, see what that actually looks like, debug it, see what's going on under the hood. Same idea, deploying already developed exploit frameworks using these methods. So taking things that have already been developed and just putting them on this and doing it the same way. And then another note, so this is just one specific flaw that was discovered in 2007. AutoIT has been around since 1999, and there's 40,000 pages of posts on their forum. I'm sure there's a lot more that could be discovered here, and this specifically just uses a single Windows API. I don't know how many Windows APIs there are in total, but AutoIT natively has access to all of them. So I'm sure there is a ton more stuff that can be figured out, discussed, and used to see what it looks like for further research. So again, if you're interested, just message me. I'm on LinkedIn, Ezra Woods. And then also, I have a lot of resources for this. So I have a bunch of Python scripts and then also the scripts we showed. I'm going to put all of them on GitHub. I just haven't done it yet. But if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'll post a link to that in the next couple days whenever I get around to it. Yeah, so I think that's about it. We are pretty early. So for however rest of the time we have left, we'll just take questions if anyone has them. Here, you first, go. So yeah, that is the crazy thing. The question was, what is the company behind AutoIT? What are they doing? For the second question, nothing. They're not helping. The guy who made it, he is a real dude, because I was very curious about that as well. I looked into all the people that helped develop it near the beginning of this. It is a real man. He just was a Microsoft developer way back in the day, made this for his own purposes, and it kind of took off. The company is just AutoIT, like LLC or whatever. But yeah, they're not doing anything about it. There's literally hundreds of forum posts being like, hey, why is AutoIT allowing this to happen? And they just delete it, and the user gets banned. Same thing with, yeah, same thing with like reverse engineering. If you add, and I'm not kidding, you ask anything about reverse engineering the compiled scripts, you just instantly banned, just gone. So they don't care, because they also don't make any money off of it. From what I can tell, there's no like paid version, no enterprise support services. It's just a thing. But yeah, any other questions? Go ahead. I can't quite hear you. Did you? So is the signed executable, do we have a way to identify it and block it? Is that the question? Oh, yes, you could. So that's kind of, we sort of touched on that, but not really. So yes, there are, I think it's something like 16 total verified executables that they have that are all signed. And so yes, you could. And that would be effective as long as they couldn't just get a random executable on your host, because you can just change the hash of the interpreter, and then it'll be a different hash, no certificate. And from what we were seeing, so since the compiled executables are still running and not being detected, I haven't tested it, but I'm pretty sure that would still work in most cases. Like Mike was saying, if you have enough solutions in place to where something new, never before seen, isn't going to be allowed to run on the host, yeah, that would definitely block it. But again, how many of us can guarantee with 100% certainty that that'll be the case? Any other questions? So the question was, what is AutoIT in terms of a product like shareware, freeware? I think everywhere is a great answer to that. It's advertised as a Windows automation platform, but yeah, it is, I guess, technically shareware. It's all free. There's no like anything you have to do. You just go to the website and it's like, download here. Okay. But yeah, there's no monetization around any of it, which I find really suspicious, because the guy clearly isn't making money from anything he's doing with it. But yeah, I don't know if there is like an official term for it. It's just something someone made that, and it's weird because it's closed source, right? So it's not even community developed. You can't see how it works under the hood. So that's another thing. I didn't put it in the future research slide, but reverse engineering the actual interpreter, that would also be pretty cool. I don't think anyone's done that yet. But yeah, it's pretty closed. That's, nope. Yep. Yes. Yeah, so, and I can think of a lot of other, the question was, there's nothing inherently malicious about AutoIT. That is true. It is just, a tool, but it's being used for evil. And I can think of a lot of other tools that you could use this way, but most of them are paid for, right? So like you wouldn't be able to do that with any sort of, yeah. Yeah, it's similar. And there's a ton of other stuff you could do with this, but again, like this one's just free and it works, so.
So kind of putting off of that question, how would you go about threat hunting for malicious AutoIT?
Great question. I would say right now, the number one way, and one of those things I'll put on GitHub when I post that repository. So Oxtoxin, he has a Yarrow rule that you can use for to hunt for this. So every compiled script, no matter what, and I haven't seen any way that it gets around this, is going to have the same entry point. So that AU3 !06, that'll be within every single file. So that's the key thing. If you can look for that and find it, you can find every instance of this that we've seen so far. So at the moment, for all of this, I just used Ghidra because that's what I had installed. But I'd rather have IDA. I just can't afford IDA. But I was at just the other day, I was checking out Binary Ninja too. It seems pretty cool. It's also paid. Ghidra's free. But Binary Ninja seems pretty awesome too. I saw that in one of the other talks and checked it out, and it seemed pretty capable for the price. Yeah. That is a great question that I forgot to put in the slides. So that is a whole process. So there are a few open source tools for decompiling the AutoIT scripts, and that's what I ended up using. They're just all like 7 years old and don't run well. So it's kind of a trial and error. I can't remember their names. This will be another thing I link to in GitHub. But there's a few repositories that have programs for decompiling them. And what those do is just revert them to the AutoIT script. But decompiling the actual compiled scripts like in Gijor or IDA, good luck. Like it's just, like Mike was saying, it imports every single Windows API. And it's a huge file. Even for a hello world, it's like a bunch of megabytes, and it's ridiculous.
The other thing you'll notice too is, like, you'd think, well, okay, you could go to strings. Like, I'm going to create a specific compiled AutoIT binary, and then I'm going to go look for my own strings. No, none of the strings are there. They're all encoded in a way that's not easy to reverse.
And I'll add to that too. So this isn't official knowledge by AutoIT, but one of the things I was reading in the forums, the way it compiles these scripts is it converts all of the strings into like a custom bytecode it uses that, of course, the interpreter can read but doesn't tell you what it is. So they're pretty obfuscated just in general when decompiling it that way. Any other questions? Cool. I guess we'll finish there then.